Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for Carol. We thank you for her willingness to prepare for this moment and to speak to us of you. Thank you for the word that you have laid on her. Would you, by your Spirit, use her to speak to us, and would you open our ears? Would you free our hearts? Or would you enable us to hear what you would have us hear today? In your name we ask it. Amen.
Well, good morning, everyone. I haven't done a joke for a while, so I'm going to do a couple actually. These jokes are nothing to do with the sermon, they're just written by Christians in my Christian joke book. Right. Insanity is hereditary. You catch it from your children. That's very true, isn't it? Can you hear me all right at the back? And the other one is, they're very short little jokes. Adolescence is when children don't know what to do. So, and obviously we've heard it a couple of times now that it's Palm Sunday today, and for many of you who are ancient like me, you would have heard the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem hundreds of times. In fact, one Sunday, just before Richard, my vicar, and I were both going to be preaching in separate churches, he said to me, Carol, how many times can we talk about Jesus riding on the donkey? And so here we go for the umpteenth time. But it's always important to remember that there are always newer Christians amongst us that would have heard this perhaps only once or twice before, if at all. And it will become obvious a little later why the story of Jesus would be crucified and the great Passover festival was about to begin. I'm going to talk a little bit about Passover now, just for the people that are newer Christians to get the context of what was happening. The word Passover is because many centuries before, the angel of death passed over the houses of the Jews who had spread lamb's blood on the doorposts and lintels of their houses as they had been told to do by Moses, as protection from this angel of death, who when he saw the houses with the lamb's blood on, he passed over. The lamb's blood saved each household. Pharaoh finally allowed the Jewish people to leave his country. And the Jews celebrated this from then onwards annually and still do today. The great celebration of freedom from captivity and enslavement that the Jews experienced from very oppressive slave masters. A nation enslaved within a nation. Actually, that was and still is quite a rare occurrence when a whole nation is enslaved within another nation. The angel of death was not going to pass over Jesus just 1 week later on Good Friday. His death was to serve the ultimate purpose for humanity. His death ushered in the resurrection 3 days later, freeing humanity from the captivity and enslavement of sin for all those who would accept and follow Jesus. His freedom cry on the cross, "It is finished," meant freedom for us all, not just the Jewish nation, all the nations of the earth, countless millions every century. Jews came from all over the Roman world to Jerusalem during this week-long celebration to remember the great exodus from Egypt. Jesus, as we heard in the reading, told his disciples to go into the village opposite, and you will find a colt, the foal of a donkey tied, upon which no one has sat. Bring it to me. Jesus knew, without going into that village, exactly where the right type of donkey would be. A donkey upon which no one has sat. This is in itself of special significance, because in Judaic law, objects used for sacred purposes must never have been used for any other reason. When carrying the Ark of the Covenant upon a cart, it had to be pulled by animals that had never been yoked before. This donkey was to carry not a sacred item, but the most sacred person. Jesus further instructs them, if anyone challenges you as to why you are taking a donkey, tell them the Lord has need of it, and they will immediately comply, which they did. The disciples threw their clothes on the donkey, and Jesus sat on it. In verse 8 we heard that many spread their clothes on the road, and others cut down leafy branches and spread them on the road. What is all this about clothes? This was the customary way for a king's subject to pay homage to him. 2 Kings chapter 9 verse 13 tells us that when Jehu is acclaimed king, people placed garments under his feet. I couldn't help actually, when I was preparing this, get a mental picture of our gold stagecoach with King Charles in it, which we are going to see in a few weeks' time in the coronation. A bit different from a donkey. Once you think something, you can't get it out of your mind, so you may all remember that if you're watching the coronation. I am an ardent royalist, by the way, so I'm not being too disrespectful. It's just the comparison. Nowadays, state visits are regular occurrences in most countries. They normally involve the visiting dignitary disembarking from their plane and waving to the receiving throng. A pretty standard formula, shaking hands with those lining up to greet them. In a similar way, military giants such as Alexander the Great and Judas Maccabeus entered the city as leaders, or self-proclaimed leaders. They came with pomp and ceremony, cheered, or perhaps jeered, by the crowds, and quite often finished with an approach to the temple. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, it was a similar situation. But this wasn't just someone taking a trip to the big city. The events of Palm Sunday proclaim Jesus as King and start a week that sees him crucified as King of the Jews. The prophecy of Zechariah 9:9 is fulfilled in Jesus riding on this foal of a donkey. This clear prediction of Christ's entry into Jerusalem was delivered some 400 years before it is finally fulfilled, which shows how long some prophecies can take to be fulfilled. Once we hear a prophecy, we want it happening this week or next month or in 2 or 3 years. Not lifetimes and lifetimes. In this verse, we see again how much God's ways differ from man's. Men look for a conquering king, high and exalted, to come and deliver Jerusalem from Roman rule, with an army of mighty men. What they saw was a meek and lowly rabbi, riding upon a donkey's colt. And his angels were truly aware of the scope of his sacrifice as they watched him as he purposefully travelled that road to his coming death. The crowds loved him. They sang praises, danced along, strewing branches. What they sang was also significant, for it showed they recognised him as king. They recognised that he was fulfilling prophecy. In acclaiming Jesus with the words of Psalm 118, which they all knew so well, which said, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," the people were publicly acknowledging him as their Messiah. When Jesus arrived at Jerusalem, he knew what awaited him, and yet he continued. He let the crowds shout their praise. They were correct in their understanding so far, but they did not understand where Jesus' kingship would lead him. Jesus knew. On 3 separate occasions prior to this momentous week, Jesus clearly told his disciples what was going to happen to him. What was Jesus thinking and feeling as he sat on that donkey being cheered and waved along? I wonder. He was divine, but oh so human as well. He had already struggled in the Garden of Gethsemane. This was a different struggle yet again. He was facing loss on that long road into Jerusalem. He was facing the loss of family and friends, the loss of life itself. We only have to look at Gethsemane. When I did my bereavement training, it was impressed upon us that when someone is about to die and they are aware of it, then a sense of bereavement takes them over, because they are facing multiple losses. They are having to say goodbye to multiple people and multiple situations. When we are faced with someone dying, we are losing and saying goodbye to one person. The dying person is having to do this many times over to people, family and friends, colleagues, to hobbies and pleasures, to holidays, to this beautiful earth. Many do not understand that there could be something so much more precious awaiting them if they could grasp it. And we have the honour and blessing of knowing and telling. For Jesus, he knew he was going to rise again from death, but it would never be life lived with those he loved on earth. He would have to wait for them to join him. He chose to become one of us, to become a human being, with all the limitations that imposed upon him, in causing him to experience human emotions. He made that choice, and in embracing humanity, he knows exactly how we feel. He knows loneliness. It is one of the major challenges for a lot of people in our country. Deep, empty loneliness. And a challenge for us to address that, to show love, compassion and care. We do not walk this life unaccompanied. Beside us is the one who cares and knows all our emotions. He knows what it is like to walk alone the road. It is good for us to linger with him and reflect on what he is going through, he was going through. So with purpose, humility, clarity and great courage, he rode towards his death. And as he rode, he knew that he was finally going to be the conquering, victorious king, because his opponent was death itself. in the grim battle spread out before him, he knew who he was and why he had come. The outcome of this battle had been written and recorded before all time, before time began. He put death to death for us, because he longs for us. Death could not hold him, and it cannot hold us. He was both an awesome and triumphant king, and an awesome and triumphant servant. What can we take from this final week of Lent's little talk today? Hopefully, we can take a deeper appreciation of what Jesus went through, even in the midst of the celebrating people around him. As lonely people say, you can be surrounded in a crowd or at a party, but still be lonely. How does that apply to us? It can help us to understand better what people are facing in the midst of everyone else celebrating. They may be facing despairing news and difficult choices, possibly a despairing future, because that's how it looks to them in that moment. And we are not alone feeling those things in the midst of everyone else getting along with their lives, if that is how some are feeling today, for we are observed and loved, seen and thoroughly known to the one who gave so much just for each and every one of us. We cannot comprehend, really, we never will, this side of heaven, how precious we are to him. This beautiful earth, including the gorgeous oceans and blue skies, were made just for us to enjoy and be in awe of. All over our country and other countries, selfless people tackle loneliness by providing friendship, providing community, providing care, providing hope. It's the kingdom way, because the King walked that road. He said, and it's so simple, I always feel the whole of the Bible is summed up in this little sentence: love God, love your neighbour. In other words, love each other. One day we will stand in his heaven. We will see him and we will collapse before him. If humans in the Bible collapse before angels, we most certainly will collapse when we realise who he really is, how much he has accepted us, his adopted children, with all our failings, just because his love for each one of us is monumental. Amen.